Alright y'all, so today I want to make a very quick video on a lost and cancelled Fantastic Four film that we could have gotten in the late 90s. It would have been directed by Peter Segal, who's mainly known for films like Tommy Boy and Nutty Professor 2, also with a screenplay that was supposed to be penned by Philip Morton, and it also was supposed to be produced by Chris Columbus. So I kind of wanted to discuss this lost film, get into a little bit of history, what it could have been, why it was canceled, and my overall thoughts on it. So first, a little bit of history. In 1995, Fox, Marvel, Brooke Eichinger all came together to basically make a big budget Fantastic Four film for the big screen. Fox hired Chris Columbus to basically, alongside his production company, to direct the upcoming Fantastic Four film. And initially, Columbus, he was on the film to direct it. Michael France would write a big, bombastic, comic book-filled screenplay, and with Columbus attached, the progress on this film was moving forward steadily. It wasn't until Fox found out about the script and realized that this script will be way too expensive to do in the 90s. Budgets for Chris Columbus' Fantastic Four reached as high as $280 million. There was also some pre-production work. Columbus hired Tim Flattery to do some work and concept work for this version and possibly the version we're going to discuss in this video. But ultimately, the project, Chris Columbus's Fantastic Four, would collapse. Fox was really worried about the spiraling budget. They felt like that they needed to rewrite the movie to get the budget down. And Columbus was kind of worried that Fox might meddle in this film, especially with Fox's history of studio interference. So in early 1997, Columbus stepped away from the directing chair and basically would remain on the project as a hands-on producer. Also, Michael France, who written the previous version of Fantastic Four when Columbus was attached to direct, would leave the project to go to Universal and write a Hulk film. So at this point, Fantastic Four at Fox was without a director and without a writer. The project was in a little bit of limbo, but Columbus was still attached as producer, and obviously his production company was still there. So progress on the movie still continued. Fox was looking for new writers and new directors to possibly helm this Fantastic Four film for the big screen, also with an effort to keep the budget from spiraling out of control. Eventually, Fox brought on Philip Morton to basically help rewrite and get the Michael Francis script down to a level that was more budget-friendly and more reasonable to make. While Columbus and Fox were also looking for a new director, they eventually circled around Peter Segal, who is a director that kind of has like a comedy background. Like I mentioned before, he did Tommy Boy, in 1995, which was it was a cult success. He also did other films like Nutty Professor 2, amongst other films. So this guy definitely had a comedic background, and Fox definitely seemed like they wanted to hire someone with a comedic background to do Fantastic Four. Now, just for the record, I've seen some people say that like Peter Segal, he signed on to direct Fantastic Four. Well, I've heard other reports say that he was definitely circled and asked, but he would ultimately turn down the job. Either way, Segal would leave the project, but just kind of wanted to put that disclaimer out. Either one, he was attached, or either he was thinking about doing it. That being said, Peter Segal was even approached by Stan Lee about the job, about directing Fantastic Four, and Columbus and Fox seemed to really like him. Now, in terms of like what this movie actually is, before we get into the reasons why it was canceled, there's really not much beyond the things that we kind of already knew with the Columbus Fantastic Four. Tim Flattery, like I said, was hired on by Columbus to do concept art, and it seemed like he did some concept art for Columbus when Columbus was still attached to direct. But that was early 1997, so he could have also been doing concept art for the movie in mid to late 1997, maybe when Segal was briefly attached to direct this movie. And a lot of the concept art features these really 90s era concept sketches for Fantastic Four, what could have been on the big screen. You have Doom on the right on my little thumbnail / picture for the video that shows Doom all in this kind of metallic metal human hybrid looking, with like his muscles being full of like metal and stuff. Very strange and alien design, but definitely I think going in the right place. Also, you got the Fantastic Four in their kind of chrome armor suits that I kind of featured in the last Fantastic Four video with Columbus. And, those look very interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say they look horrible, but I would say that I would prefer a more comic accurate look. But like I said, it does definitely scream 90s. So definitely would have been interesting if these versions of the characters made it to the big screen. In terms of what the story of Peter Segal's slash Phil Morton's Fantastic Four could have been, sadly, Phil Morton's script hasn't really been leaked online. But my best guess is that it's basically similar to Michael Frantis' script, but just much more heavily rewritten. It's probably just rewritten. Maybe there was like some action sequences taken out, and it's basically just a rewritten version of his script, just all in an effort to bring down the budget, which, like I said, I'm just completely guessing here. But that's just my best guess, which I don't think necessarily is a bad thing. I mean, Frantis' script was good, but there was a lot of action sequences and definitely a lot of work and definitely a lot of revising that needed to be done. But that's, like I said, I'm just completely assuming things here. So that being said, there is really not much beyond the initial details that we know about this movie. A lot of it for me is just basically guessing what this film could have been. Now, why did this film ultimately get canceled? Well, despite the fact that Peter Segal was either attached to direct or at least heavily circled and in talks to direct, especially being approached by Stan Lee to do the movie, Peter Segal would eventually drop out or just not accept the job to do Fantastic Four. His reasoning was that he felt that Fox should actually do an X-Men movie instead. I feel like X-Men as a property would appeal a lot more to children, and there's just a bigger market for an X-Men film. While he felt like Fantastic Four as a property was just, kind of out of date. The characters were out of date, and Fantastic Four just wasn't hip to the 90s, It didn't really make sense to make a movie with the Fantastic Four in the 90s. So with those kind of reasonings and his kind of motivations, Peter Segal would leave Fantastic Four and not direct the movie. In terms of the other kind of fallout from this, Phil Morton, who kind of stayed on the project for a little bit longer, but eventually in spring to early 1998, he was replaced as the writer by Sam Hamm, which I think was for a script that was better or for worse, but he eventually left the project as well. Now with Chris Columbus. Now, Chris Columbus initially was attached to produce the movie, and he stayed on. I mean, he stayed on from 1997, 1998, I think all the way up to certain versions of the movie, but definitely by early 2000 or 2001, he was off the project. It's kind of unclear whether this change happened because Fox asked, basically Chris Columbus was giving some input of what the Fantastic Four movie could have been. I think he apparently suggested to Fox that the thing could be CGI. And I guess Fox was just fed up with Chris Columbus. So either in 1997 or 98 or 99, basically Fox cut all creative involvement from Chris Columbus. Basically saying that you're not going to be a producer, you're definitely not going to direct, we'll just put your name as an executive producer on the final film. So ultimately, Chris Columbus was basically pushed out of the Fantastic Four film that we would eventually get by Tim Story in 2005. So now for my overall quick thoughts on Peter Segal's Chris Columbus's produced Fantastic Four movie. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's really not much to be known about this movie. I still would have loved to seen a Chris Columbus produced Fantastic Four movie. Even if he can't direct it, I feel like if he's just producing it alongside a director like maybe Peter Segal, I feel like this movie still would have been really solid if it ever got made. I feel like they could have got the budget down. I feel like with Chris Columbus producing it, I think it definitely would have been a highlight of the 90s if the movie ever came out. And Peter Segal, I really like Tommy Boy, so I think he might have been a pretty decent choice for Fantastic Four. I mean, he definitely did a lot of interesting stuff in his filmography. So, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a shame. I'm more positive about this movie than Sam Hamm's Fantastic Four, which, his script for that movie is not really that good. So, I don't know. Like I said, there's kind of a huge lack of information. But, I mean, with Chris Columbus producing it, and Peter Segal is a pretty decent filmmaker, so this could have been a pretty decent movie, but it seemed like all the parties involved, especially with Peter Segal not really getting the Fantastic Four, maybe it may have been the best thing that maybe he didn't do this movie and, not directed it, right? But that's just kind of my quick thoughts on it. So yeah, overall, this is kind of a quick video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. That was Peter Segal's canceled Fantastic Four film that we could have gotten in the late 90s. Hopefully you all have a nice day. Peace.